Hi YouTube, my name is Marco Berenger. I'm a medical doctor and a full professor of sports medicine and exercise physiology at Goethe University, Frankfurt, Germany. If you're trying to build your muscle, you probably heard the warning, don't do cardio, it will kill your gains. In this video, we want to look very carefully at that claim using only recent systematic reviews and meta-analyses on concurrent strength and endurance training. We will focus specifically on muscle hypertrophy and we will answer the questions, does endurance training really interfere with muscle growth? Are there situations where it might even support hypertrophy? And what does this mean for your own training? So let's do this. Before we interpret the data, we need to be precise about what muscle hypertrophy means because not all measurements are the same. Researchers look at hypertrophy on two different levels. Whole muscle level, for example, cross-sectional area of your muscle, of your quadriceps muscle, for example, measured by MRI or ultrasound. This is close to what you can see in the mirror and what many strength athletes care about. And then there's the muscle fiber level, the size of individual type 1, type 2 fibers measured in biopsies under the microscope. This tells us how different fiber types adapt, but it is more technically demanding and much noisier. This distinction is important because we'll see that the answer is slightly different depending on which level you look at. Let's start with the outcome that matters most for many lifters, the overall muscle size. A 2022 meta-analysis in sports medicine pooled 43 studies comparing a strength-only group versus a concurrent training group doing the same strength program plus additional aerobic training. The key result for muscle hypertrophy was a standardized mean difference of minus 0.01 with confidence intervals spanning clearly across zero, and that in practical terms means that on average, concurrent training did not reduce whole muscle hypertrophy compared with strength training alone. This finding was remarkably robust. It didn't matter whether the aerobic training was running or cycling. It didn't matter whether participants trained more or less than 5 sessions per week. And it didn't matter whether they were untrained or already active or younger or older adults. So if your main concern is, will some cardio make my muscle smaller? The available evidence at the whole muscle level is very clear. Within realistic training volumes, adding endurance training on top of well-designed strength training programs does not measurably diminish your muscle growth. There is a compromise, but this shows up somewhere else. In the same meta-analysis, explosive strength, things like jumping or rapid force development, that was moderately reduced with concurrent training, especially if strength and endurance were crammed into the same session with little rest between them. From a hypertrophy perspective, the take-home message is simple. Cardio kills your gains is not supported at the whole muscle level. But now let's zoom in a little bit more and answer what happens to the individual muscle fibers. Now it gets a little bit more nerdy, but this is actually where the interference story lives. A second meta-analysis, also published in 2022, looked specifically at fiber hypertrophy during concurrent training. Here the same comparisons were made, strength only versus strength plus endurance, with identical strength programming in both groups. But instead of MRI, the authors analyzed biopsies and measured changes in type 1 and type 2 fiber size. The main findings were, for overall fiber hypertrophy, type 1 and type 2 combined, concurrent training showed a small negative effect compared with strength alone. And when broken down by fiber type, the attenuation was more pronounced for type 1 fibers, here slow twitch marathon fibers, and smaller and statistically unclear for your strong type 2 fibers. So at the microscopic level, concurrent training may slightly blunt fiber hypertrophy, especially in type 1 fibers. And why is that? Well, the authors discussed several plausible mechanisms. Endurance training, especially at low to moderate intensity, primarily recruits type 1 fibers repeatedly According to the size principle, these fibers are engaged first and for longer periods. This chronic endurance stimulus may push type 1 fibers more towards oxidative efficiency and fatigue resistance, potentially limiting how large they can become in response to the strength work. In other words, you're asking the same fiber to become a better marathon runner and a better powerlifter at the same time. So the results, at least in shorter studies, seem to be slightly less increase in fiber diameter, particularly in type 1 fibers. Nevertheless, for the advanced audience, this is an important nuance. At the fiber level, concurrent training produces a small but real signal of interference, especially in type 1 fibers. But in the real world, this effect is subtle and often invisible when you look at the entire muscle. Now let's talk about the question, can endurance training enhance muscle growth? So far we talked about no effect at whole muscle level and small negative effect at fiber level, but there is also evidence pointing in the opposite direction, at least under certain circumstances. Within the set of studies behind these meta-analyses, one notable trial by Kasia and colleagues reported that adding endurance exercise actually enhanced the hypertrophic response to strength training. In that study, the concurrent group showed greater increases in muscle fiber size and higher expression of key anabolic signaling proteins like mTOR compared with the strength training alone. This suggests that endurance exercise can, in some contexts, prime the muscle for a stronger anabolic response, perhaps by increasing capillarization, substrate delivery, or other aspects of muscle metabolism that support recovery and adaptation. Of course, this is one study within the broader literature, and the overall meta-analytic signal still points to a small net attenuation of fiber hypertrophy with concurrent training. But the key message here is the relationship is not a simple on-off incompatibility. Under some programming conditions, endurance work may even support hypertrophy instead of fighting it. And what does this mean for your training if you care about muscle growth? Putting all these findings together, we can draw several practical conclusions for lifters whose primary goal is hypertrophy. So for most people, moderate endurance training does not meaningfully reduce whole muscle hypertrophy. The meta-analytic effects at the whole muscle level is essentially zero. At the fiber level, there is small attenuation, particularly in type 1 fibers. This is detectable under the microscope, but it is small, variable, and does not clearly translate into less visible muscle mass in the short to medium term studies that we currently have available. The type of endurance training matters, so if hypertrophy is your priority, the current evidence suggests favoring cycling or similar modalities over high volume running because the interference signal for fiber type 1 is stronger with running. What about this, the session structure? Well, doing strength and endurance back to back in the same session tends to blunt explosive strength gains. So separating them by several hours or on different days seems to mitigate this, and there is no clear negative effect on hypertrophy. And endurance can be neutral and sometimes even supportive for hypertrophy. At least one trial, as I reported, is that the enhanced fiber hypertrophy can occur and anabolic signaling is increased when endurance exercise is combined with strength training. So this highlights that the relationship is more complex than a simple interference story. And from a health perspective, the combination is clearly superior. So the overall health benefits of concurrent training appear to exceed those of either mode alone, and the risk of meaningful interference in muscle size and maximal strength is generally low for recreational athletes. So does cardio kill your gains? Based on the recent high-quality meta-analyses at the whole muscle level, No, concurrent training does not measurably compromise hypertrophy. At the fiber level, there is a small fiber type specific attenuation, especially in type 1 fibers and particularly with running-based endurance work. In some contexts, endurance training may even enhance hypertrophic signaling and fiber growth. If your main goal is building muscle, the evidence suggests you can safely include well-programmed endurance training, especially cycling-type modalities, while still making robust hypertrophy gains and at the same time improving your cardiovascular health and performance. So the cardio kills your gains slogan makes for a catchy meme, but it does not reflect what the current science actually shows. Hope you liked this episode. See you soon. Bye-bye.